Hello and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really powerful framework for finding some genuine clarity and purpose in a confusing world. We're going to explore a structured way to understand truth, not as something we just make up, but as something we can actually discover in the world around us and, within ourselves. So let's get right into it. And this is the big question, isn't it? I mean, we are constantly being told to follow your feelings or live your truth. But what happens when our feelings are all over the place, or they seem to clash with the world around us? This explainer offers a totally different starting point, the idea that truth is grounded in something solid, something objective. So here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, we'll nail down what we even mean by objective truth. Then, we'll look at where all that inner conflict and confusion actually comes from. After that, we'll talk about the mindset you need to find clarity. And finally, we'll get into some practical, real-world steps you can take for discernment. Okay, let's start with the foundation. This entire framework really rests on one central idea, that truth isn't something we invent, it's something we discover in reality itself. So the classic definition of truth is the adequation of intellect and thing. I know, sounds kind of fancy, but it's actually saying something incredibly simple. A thought is true when it lines up with reality. That's it. If I think there's $5 in my wallet and I look and, yep, there's $5, my thought is true. It matches the thing. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you take this a step further from a theological view, since God is the omnipotent creator of everything, then reality itself is a direct expression of his mind. The way things are is a perfect reflection of how he designed them to be. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It's not some deep, unknowable mystery. If you really want to understand God's intent, the very first place you should look is at the world he made. The sky is blue, rocks are hard. These simple things actually tell us something about the mind that brought them into existence. So this brings that huge principle right down to you and me. If all of reality reflects God's mind, well, that includes our own physical, biological reality. The whole argument here is that your body isn't some random accident or a mistake. It's the primary, tangible starting point for understanding God's specific will and design for you as an individual. Okay, so if reality is supposed to be that clear, why do we feel so confused so often? Why does it sometimes feel like our feelings are at war with our own bodies? Let's jump into our next section and see how this framework explains that internal conflict. The key to unlocking this whole puzzle lies in a part of the brain called the cognitive power. You can think of it like an internal engine that's constantly creating perspectives. It's not pure logic or reason. It's this incredibly powerful force that shapes how we feel about everything we see and experience. So how does this engine actually work? Well, it's kind of like a mental assembly line. First, your senses take in the raw data from the world. Next, your imagination creates a mental picture of it. But then, and this is the absolute crucial part, the cognitive power jumps in. It's like it goes into your personal library of memories, emotions, even past traumas, and it just stamps them all over that new image. So the result isn't the raw image anymore. It's a very subjective perspective that's been layered right on top of it. So what causes this perspective engine to go haywire and create feelings that don't match reality? Well, there are a few main sources. It can be external stuff, social narratives we hear over and over again. It can be internal, like a trauma that creates a really painful association with your own body. And it can also just be really strong emotions, which, as we all know, can totally cloud our judgment and pull us way off from a balanced view of the truth. All right, so we've got this clear reality on one side, and on the other, this powerful internal faculty that can create these really convincing, conflicting perspectives. So how in the world do you bridge that gap? The path to clarity, in this framework, comes down to 2 essential things: humility and grace. Now, this definition of humility is so important. It's not about putting yourself down or thinking you're worthless. It's about making an active, really courageous choice to say, I am willing to align my life with the way things actually are, even if that clashes with how I feel right now. It's a real act of courage. And the second piece of the puzzle is grace. In this context, actual grace is kind of like a divine helping hand, like someone flipping on a light switch that helps to enlighten the mind. It's what can allow a person to finally grasp a truth about themselves, to see themselves the way God sees them, even when that truth seems to fly in the face of a self-image they've held onto for years. It's what provides that spark of clarity. So that brings us to our final section, the practical stuff. How do you actually do this? Because it's not just about thinking differently. It's about actively retraining the habits of your mind. There are three main steps here. First, custody of the senses. That basically means being really intentional about the media and narratives you're consuming that might be feeding the confusion. Second is this active mental exercise we'll talk more about called negate and reformulate. And third, reconnecting with nature. Getting your hands dirty, doing some manual labor, grounding your mind in simple, real things can pull it away from that fuzzy, purely emotional thinking. So let's really zoom in on that negate and reformulate step because it's a two-part mental workout. So a thought or a feeling pops up that contradicts your objective biological reality. The first step is to mentally, deliberately say, no, that is a false association. You actively reject it. But you can't just stop there. The second part is just as important. You have to replace it. You reformulate that thought, consciously focusing on the objective truth of who you are as a child of God. Doing this over and over, that's how you can actually start to retrain that cognitive power. And so, we kind of get to the heart of the matter. According to this whole framework, the path to figuring out God's will isn't about chasing some subjective feeling, especially if that feeling is pushing against the natural, physical reality of how you were made. Instead, true discernment is found in that sense of peace, that tranquility of order that comes when you accept and embrace your place in the beautiful, coherent reality that God Himself designed. The real challenge, and maybe the invitation, is to look for truth not just in the storm of our feelings, but in the bedrock of objective reality. What would change for you if you started your search for truth right there?